the incident did not involve a Masonic Lodge meeting, the use of a Masonic Lodge room, or any New York Masonic ritual. He also reminded his members that firearms do not, and never have, played any role in any Masonic ritual.
The man who shoots William James had no idea what he was doing that evening, that he had no desire to shoot William James. I don't see any way in which the shooting is anything more than a really horrific kind of tragedy.
The man in question, Albert Ide, was reportedly devastated. He pleaded guilty, was charged with second-degree manslaughter and given probation. But with a criminal record, he was also expelled from the lodge.
If you break the law and you're convicted, then you will either have your membership suspended or, more often than not, thrown out completely and not be able to get back in because of what we believe Freemasonry stands for.
All true Masonic lodges, however far-flung and independent, abide by a code of honor that makes murder untenable. Therefore, logically, with the case of Roberto Calvi, no blame can be laid on true Freemasons for his death. Calvi was a member of the secretive club called P2. P2 contained over 900 powerful members, ranging from the heads of Italy's secret service to bankers, politicians, and military generals. As chairman of Banco Ambrosiano, Roberto Calvi was an ideal new recruit for P2 leader Licio Gelli.
Licio Gelli compiled a list of several hundred people that he targeted. There's evidence that he was involved in blackmailing, using pilfered files from the Italian secret services. And he had a plan to basically remake the Italian government along more authoritarian lines.
P2 was established in 1877, and it was a very traditional Italian Freemason lodge. However, in the 1960s, it was taken over by Gelli, and when Gelli infiltrated the organization, it became a Freemason lodge with an agenda.
The motives for P2 to get Calvi on board were clear. They had more sinister plans in mind that would require large sums of money. But why would Roberto Calvi, a family man and devout Catholic, join a renegade group like P2?
My father did not entirely participate in these things because of his own free choice. What happens is the bank had grown, had become a target for acquisitions. They had to survive amongst other different groups, both in the lay and Catholic finance area of the economy. And in order to do that, they had to keep contacts with the politicians. The P2 Lodge was sort of an intermediary of these politicians. So it was more of a constraint than an act of free will.
I suspect that Calvi was attracted to P2 because it offered him business opportunities, because it satisfied his interest in the idea of hidden power. He probably wasn't aware when he initially joined, he was certainly in the lower rungs of the organization, and he was actually joining not just a secret society, but a secret society with a very real and conspiratorial agenda to actually seize control of the Italian state.
There's evidence, I think, that Banco Ambrosiano was loaning money to P2 and serving as a paymaster for some of the people connected with Gelli.
These allegations, whether true or not, eventually led the authorities to become suspicious, and the scandal was derailed. P2 was officially shut down in the summer of 1981, after police raided Gelli's home and found a list of P2 members. This had drastic consequences for Roberto Calvi and would ultimately lead to his downfall.
The most direct proof that he belonged to the organization P2 was that his name was on the list found in Licio Gelli, the Grand Master of the Lodge's house in Tuscany, when it was raided by police. But Calvi never denied it. He admitted it. and many of his good friends were members as well, or many of the people that he dealt with were members.
Then Prime Minister of Italy, Arnaldo Folani, was forced to resign over revelations that several prominent politicians were on the list of P2 members found in Gelli's home. Jim Marrs is a conspiracy theorist and author of Rule by Secrecy.
I'm Jim Marrs, journalist, author, and I'm not a Mason. Basically, this was an attempt by a Masonic lodge to take over a modern country and create a right-wing dictatorship. It was just a whole little ball of wax. So don't think that everyone who questions what's going on within Freemasonry is just a conspiracy theorist. This was a conspiracy that was very well documented.
Freemasonry as a movement didn't benefit at all from any of the financial improprieties. Freemasonry really wasn't involved except for the P2 group, which was an irregular lodge.
P2, of course, had been closed down before this. It had been closed down in the mid-70s, and the Masons already firmly distanced themselves from it. It was seen as a rogue, irregular lodge, and they'd expelled the Grand Master.
Even though the members of P2 did not follow the true Masonic code of conduct, the fact that they called themselves members of a lodge and met in secret was damaging to the Freemasons.
In many ways, the P2 case is the worst case scenario for Freemasons because although it was a Freemasonry lodge, it had been infiltrated and overtaken by outside interests who then began to use the machinery of Freemasonry for its own agenda. And of course, when the scandal broke, the people who really got the absolute worst of the scapegoating over the whole scandal were the Freemasons.
The Masonic connection, in my opinion, has been overblown. Bad people can take over good ideas and good movements and subvert them and use them for bad purposes, but that's because we're human beings. Licio Gelli could have started any other group. He could have taken over a chess club and maybe did the same thing. Maybe he had more panache and a sense of the theatrical, and he thought he could use elements of Freemasonry for his own cause.
Some have tried to link the P2 name to a murder before, also in Italy. Not of a banker this time, but a pope.
If you look very closely at the circumstances surrounding the death of Pope John Paul I, there are some elements that suggest it may not be as straightforward as it has always been portrayed.
Despite the fact that Pope John Paul I had only been in power for 33 days, his appointment would turn out to be fatal. One theory, widely held, is that he was planning to run an investigation into a secretive organization that he'd only just discovered had links to the Vatican, P2.
The investigation which John Paul I would have conducted if he had lived jeopardized several high-ranking cardinals. It would have jeopardized members of P2. A great number of people in the mafia, in Italian politics, in the Italian business community, in the Italian banking community, would have had their careers threatened and potentially would have faced very large jail sentences if that investigation by Pope John Paul I had gone ahead. So of course, his very sudden, unexpected death has led many to speculate that he may have been murdered to prevent that investigation ever taking place.
The official cause of death was a heart attack. He was embalmed the day after his death, and no autopsy was performed. Rupert Cornwell, a British journalist working in Rome at the time, is skeptical about P2's involvement.
P2 was never involved with the death of John Paul I. The trouble with this whole business is it's a very fertile ground for any number of conspiracy theories. You can link things together. There are some people who think that John Paul I was murdered. I don't happen to think he was. I think he was a man who was overcome by the importance of his job and died in his bed.
But we can only guess as to what happened that day. The Freemasons insist that they are nothing but an innocent fraternal society with no ties to unlawful political power. There is evidence of Masonic symbolism even at the inauguration of United States presidents. This is George Bush Sr., swearing in his oath of office in January 1989. Millions are watching, but there's one thing they do not see. The Bible that Bush holds is filled with Masonic signs and symbols. It is the same Bible that George Washington used for his oath 200 years earlier. This Bible contains the secret alphabet of one of the world's oldest and most powerful surviving social and spiritual orders. An order whose roster of the rich and powerful has included Franklin Roosevelt, Sir Winston Churchill, and England's King Edward VIII. It may be because so many Masons hold positions of power around the world that the general public think that they are more than just a men's club.
People had got into their heads, we've never really been able to discover why, that we are this conspiracy who are trying to run the world. This idea that we were a sort of secret government behind the government. And as I said to someone recently, if we were running the world, I wouldn't be talking to you. And I wouldn't be answering your questions about the problems that we're having.
But not everyone accepts their defense against this allegation. The internet has provided a perfect platform for skeptical webmasters like Kevin McNeil Smith. He runs a website that tracks Masonic movements in all forms of media.
My name is KRP McNeil Smith, and I am not a member of a lodge of free and accepted Masons.
They're basically running a racket, right? They're racketeers, essentially. They're cutting corners. They're favoring each other. They've basically appointed themselves, and people have to decide for themselves if they want that to continue.
It's not clear what evidence McNeil Smith has to back up his claims, but his belief is that Freemasons are guilty until proven innocent. To one Mason at least, this view of an organization obsessed with nepotism and back-scratching is little more than misplaced envy.
People who claim that they've been passed over for promotion because they're not Masons never produce proof of that. If it was true, do you not think it would have been found out by now? People don't want to feel inadequate, and if they can blame someone else for real or perceived bad things, then they will do it. It takes a very strong person to confront the fact that they have not been accepted by their fellow man for whatever reason, and so it's easier to point the finger. It's their fault, not mine.
But the fears go deeper. Suspicions about corrupt police and legal officials are nothing new. But in the UK, escalating public mistrust saw the government attempt to make many Freemasons go public.
As a principle, we have no problem with that at all, because we would like our members to be proud of the fact they are Freemasons and to tell people that they are, provided they're not doing it to try and get the sort of advantage that we're claimed that we do. But to single out Freemasonry from all the many organization individual, that you're subliminally saying to the public, there's something to worry about, which is why we're asking about it.
This 1998 survey actually turned on its head the idea that many high-ranking UK officials are Freemasons.
When they did the statistics on it, the Lord Chancellor, who is in charge of the judicial system, he asked the judges and the magistrates, and less than 5% of judges were Freemasons, and that included a number who were women Freemasons, and less than 10% of the magistrates. And that rather knocked some of the conspiracy theory out of it.
For centuries, various members of the general public have been eager to buy into Masonic conspiracy. Conspiracy theories about the Freemasons are also fueled by men like Kevin McNeil Smith, who believe that power and ambition, not righteousness, lie at the core of the Masonic creed.
I read all the documents written by the churches, the various denominations that have researched this, and the only conclusion I can come to is that Freemasonry is the system of control set up by Satan to oppose the church.
For John Hamill, this claim is ridiculous and couldn't be further from the truth.
The prime qualification for entry into Freemasonry under our Grand Lodge is a belief in God. We believe that Freemasonry